Okay, hello, welcome to our class on Kundalini. I'm really excited about it. I'm just gonna jump right in. We have 1 hour and that's not a lot of time, and Kundalini is really exciting and there's a whole lot to know about it. But I just wanted to kind of give you an overview about what it is, why it's important, how it can impact your life, and basically why you should care. What is this crazy Kundalini business? Some of you might have heard it referred to as the mysterious Kundalini. I think that's the name of a book about Kundalini or something like that. I actually have not read that book, but I've just heard it referred to that way sometimes before, and I always just think it's funny. But it's kind of an accurate name because Kundalini is very mysterious. Throughout the history of the world, Kundalini rise was really difficult to come by. Thousands of years ago, when the first Kundalini yogis were working on developing the technologies of Kundalini yoga and meditation, which are technologies designed to support the rise of Kundalini. Back when that was still being started, it could take decades for a person's Kundalini to rise. And it was difficult, hard work. These people would study their yoga for hours and hours and hours every day. And this goal was Kundalini rise or enlightenment. And Kundalini rise and enlightenment kind of go hand in hand. And I would say it's difficult to achieve enlightenment without Kundalini rise. And personally, I don't believe it's possible, although maybe it is. Who knows? I'm just muting everybody. Okay, if you're not muted, please mute yourself until it's time for questions. And if you have questions, you can go and chat them to me, but I'll save those for the end. So anyway, in the past, Kundalini rise was very difficult to achieve, and it would take many, many years of yoga and meditation and just a true focus on the yogic lifestyle in order to raise the Kundalini. Kundalini yoga and meditation were passed down from master to student down through the ages up until the 1960s, when a man named Yogi Bhajan, a Kundalini yoga master, came to the United States, and he saw how terrible everything was. And it was like the hippies and the sexual revolution. And he just said, oh my gosh, these people are sick, but I have the medicine. And he felt prompted to share the technology of Kundalini yoga and meditation with the people generally. And that was the first time that Kundalini yoga and meditation as a technology had been taught to normal people. And so that was very, very exciting, and that technology has made a big difference for many thousands of people around the world and around the United States, including me. And that has been a really positive thing in my personal journey. Kundalini rise. So Kundalini rise used to take decades, and even as recently as earlier in this century of like 2000 and onward, it would take years. And once your Kundalini began to rise, it could take many years before it would actually fully rise. And when my Kundalini started rising, this time had condensed down into months, and my Kundalini rose over the course of something like 6 months. And now, earlier this year, I was called upon to help somebody with their back. They actually came to me for back problems, and as I was clearing the problems from their spine, their Kundalini spontaneously rose over the course of a single week, from going from a nothing to fully risen Kundalini, something that would be completely impossible 1,000 years ago, or even last year. And this year, even in the month of September, I had several clients that came wanting to raise their Kundalini, and I felt like that was the appropriate thing to do. So we cleared their spinal blocks, and their Kundalini rose from 0 to 60 in about an hour. So we have witnessed this enormous leap in in the human ability to make these immense changes on a kind of a biological level. So to kind of go back, what is Kundalini? Kundalini is a usually dormant energy that's located at the very base of the spine, that very, very most basic base of the spine, right where you're sitting, guys. And for most people, it just stays there forever. And I feel like that's pretty obvious when you see like the typical person, and how most people are really driven by issues of what you would call the root chakra, which is right there at the base of the spine as well. The root chakra, obviously at the base of the spine, overlaps with our genitalia, and it is really both symbolic of, but also like what the root chakra governs is matters of physical survival. So that would be food, money, power, sex, all of these survival related things. And most people just stay there. You know, their whole lives are on these issues of money, on power, on attraction to the opposite sex. You know, people get into these like treadmills of, you know, making it day to day, and that is totally a root chakra thing. And so the cool thing about getting the Kundalini to rise is that once it does begin to rise, it passes through what is called a chakra up the spinal column, and it eventually ends right there in the middle of the forehead. It goes up around the neck and then like above the top of the head and ends like right there. And as it passes through each of the major energy centers of the body, it kind of moves your body's energy into the issues that are governed by those centers. So if you aren't familiar with chakras, each chakra corresponds with the nervous ganglia along the spine. So we just talked about the root chakra at the base of the spine. That's really like genitalia related. And then the next chakra up is right over like the womb area, lots of nerves there. And then you go up a little bit to the solar plexus, and that's the seat of your identity. And it moves up into the heart, emotional issues, into the voice and speaking the truth, spiritual insight, and the connection with God. And so as your Kundalini rises up the spine, you naturally find yourself one moment. Go take it to daddy, honey. Go downstairs and tell him. I have some sticky fingers around here, I guess. So anyway, as the Kundalini rises up the spine, you begin to experience a shift in the things that are important to you. And you find yourself kind of spontaneously like going from walking that treadmill of like, money, how am I going to make it through the day? Am I getting enough sleep? Am I getting enough food? And then you start like awakening into this more creative self. And then you start really unlocking issues of your identity and becoming grounded in matters of the heart and learning to speak your truth and getting greater insights. And then eventually feeling this like very deep connection with God, which is just really beautiful. So basically the Kundalini rise helps us transition our focus to one of temporal issues, to uniting all of our varying concerns with our oneness with God. And I don't know, it's kind of a very transcendent experience. So why would Kundalini matter? Why would Kundalini rise matter? The yogis are the experts on Kundalini, and they consider the Kundalini rise to be a sort of evolution of the soul. I consider it like an upgrade, you know, like we're good how we are, but also like this is like the next step. In LDS types of terms, and please understand that I use this terminology as like a metaphor and not anything more than that. It is just to explain, but like pray about everything for your own self. But to me, one way that I have thought about Kundalini rise and Kundalini shift is kind of going from a telestial person to more of a terrestrial person, like just kind of graduating up that. If your audio is on, if you wouldn't mind using that.
That might be me. I'm sorry. I just got on. I've never used this app before.
Oh, that's okay. I'm just going through and reading everybody real quick. I don't even know who's
Here we go.
There we go. Okay. So as the Kundalini rises, this outburst of spiritual energy starts going up the spine, and people who have their Kundalini rise report that they feel just a decrease in the desire to do things like watch dumb TV, like that TV show that they loved, but they knew was not really great for their spirit and kind of a waste of time, but they just hated to give it up because what's going to happen next? Their Kundalini rises, and the next day they say, I actually don't even care. Like, I don't care about that anymore. And all of a sudden they would rather just, spend that hour reading their scriptures instead of watching TV, which I think is just huge. As a child, I think I was probably about 12 years old when I had the thought. I didn't really like church that much, but I thought, I want to like church. And I thought, okay, this is what will work for me. I will ask God to make me want to like church and make me like it, and just change my desires. And I feel like that prayer, and I started to pray that very consistently as an early teen, that really made a big difference in my own spiritual growth and progression. Just changing my desires, but Kundalini Rise naturally does that, and shifts the things that you care about. And what a blessing, because I know from personal experience how hard it can be to make the right decision when you just want to read that book, you just want to watch that show, and that it's not the best thing for you, but you just want to do it. And sorry, but that show is just so much more fun than Isaiah, and how nice to have this technology of Kundalini yoga and meditation and energy work that helps you just naturally transcend these issues of the natural man. So how does Kundalini actually rise? Kundalini, okay, so there's a couple of prerequisites to Kundalini rising. The first thing is that all of your spiritual anatomy needs to be in place. So what I have found is that under trauma, like in times of acute trauma, sometimes parts of the energetic body will just decide to turn off and run away. They're like, this is not safe, I'm leaving. So your chakras can actually just exit your body and just go somewhere else. And it's really kind of a safety mechanism so that the parts of you, it's like a way to protect yourself, basically, self-protection. If somebody says something that really damages your sense of identity, maybe your chakra of identity will actually just exit your body so that it doesn't have to feel the pain of that attack on your person. And so if you're missing a chakra, then your Kundalini cannot rise. So you need all of your chakras in place. You need a thing called the caduceus in place, which is, that's like the Greek term for it, but the Indians or the yogis would call it like the Sushmana, which goes up along the spine, and then the Ida and Pingala, which are like the snakes that go up along the spine. It looks like the staff of Hermes, with the little wings that show that you're a doctor. That's like a perfect representation of the spinal column and the energies that run along it and how it fits together with Kundalini rise. So you need all of your chakras in place and your Ida, Pingala, Sushmana in place. And those are like the big ones. But if they're not in place, then the Kundalini cannot rise. And what I have also seen is sometimes they are in place, the Kundalini starts rising, and then the chakra will flee. Like your Kundalini is stuck in the second chakra and your fifth chakra flees. Your Kundalini cannot rise any further until that comes back. So, so the precipitating event for a Kundalini rise is a Kundalini spark. And the spark of Kundalini can happen from a lot of things. It can actually happen from trauma. It can happen from sexual stimulation, because it is right there at the base of the spine. It can happen even from just sitting in certain ways. I've read a bunch of accounts of people whose Kundalinis spontaneously began rising because they were office workers, and just the way that they happened to sit in their office chair kind of like got their spinal column at the bottom just in perfect alignment for a Kundalini rise, and everything just happened. For me personally, mine seemed to have sparked like right around my daughter was born and my brother died like right at about the same time, and that just was such a big experience that it just shook everything up, and just that was the spark, and things just started going from there. For my own self, Kundalini spark, kind of like in the Bible dictionary, talks about how you can gain faith by hearing the testimonies of others. Kundalini sparks can also be kind of like contagious like that too, where if you become in close contact with somebody whose Kundalini is risen, your Kundalini can kind of sympathetically spark as well. And so when I discovered that, I asked for the gift that whenever I personally came into contact with somebody whose energetic anatomy was ready for it, that their Kundalini would begin to spark. So that is one reason why a lot of people who come to me for energy work, like whether or not we work on Kundalini, they usually leave with at least a Kundalini sparking, because usually if there was damage to the chakras, they're reinstalled and called back and everything, and all of a sudden they're ready to have that spark, and then just because of how I've asked it to be, the spark just kind of naturally starts. So once you have the spark of Kundalini, then to get it to rise all the way up the spine, you need, basically what's keeping it from rising up the spine is blocks. The Kundalini unblocked will just naturally rise up the spine, and you don't need to do anything about it once it has sparked. It will just naturally flow upwards. But the problem is that most of us have stuff lodged in the spine. That would be trapped emotions, trapped trauma, bad beliefs, stuff of that nature. And those can manifest both energetically and emotionally, like those feelings in the back of your psyche that just, when you're fully quiet, it's that nagging feeling at the back of your mind, and maybe it's lodged somewhere in your spine. And the other thing can be physical spinal injury. And it's important to note that many, if not most, or possibly all physical symptoms, including injury, have an energetic backup or energetic component, energetic root. And so what happened with this person came to me with spine problems. They had extreme back pain that was not responsive to surgery, not responsive to medical intervention. And so, of course, who turns to the kind of stuff that, who turns to energy stuff? It's desperate people that nothing else has worked for them. And so, so he came to me for spinal help, and I found that as we started just working on the physical spinal injuries and healing those up. Okay, be quiet, honey. Have some water. Go to daddy. I'm so sorry. Hey, honey, I'm on a call right now. This is my daughter, Sarah. She is 3. It was her bedtime like an hour ago. You all know how it goes. So anyway, as we started healing up his physical spine, his Kundalini just spontaneously rose on up. And what I found was that his Kundalini had been kind of trying to rise, and the fact that there were these emotional traumas lodged in his spine those traumas were keeping the Kundalini from rising. And so as we cleared them, the Kundalini just naturally rose, and it took a week to rise it up all the way. Again, so completely unheard of even like 10 or 20 years ago. And his the Kundalini experience, basically the pain that he was experiencing in his back was, I mean, it didn't feel that way to him at a time, but it was a gift. All of the aches and pains that we feel in our body are our body's way of telling us that something needs to be healed. And so he came to me with this excruciating back pain, but really what he came to me for was emotional traumas that had backlogged over the course of his life. And so the real gift here was not helping his spine or even rising the Kundalini, but the real important thing was helping him transcend the traumas of his past so that he could fully operate in the present and not be held back by these issues of, past trauma. Even one thing that comes to mind is one event that we had to heal was like, his mom made a dinner that he thought was really gross, and then they were like, you can't get away from your seat until you eat your dinner. And it's like this trauma that's lodged in his spine, preventing the rise of Kundalini. But if it's traumatic, it's traumatic. If it's a trauma to you, it doesn't matter if it's breaking your nail or, getting a bad haircut, that can totally obstruct, that can totally mess with your energy. And healing up those issues that's the real gift. And the Kundalini rise is kind of like a side effect of the healing that we all, I feel, desperately crave. We all want to experience that stillness and being able to focus on the present without those panics about the future, without those anxieties about what's going to happen next, and insecurities and, these worries and regrets about the past, removing ourselves from the worries of the past and the future and learning how to be fully in the present. And that is one of the gifts of Kundalini Rise. I want to mention here that Kundalini Rise is just the first step. Eventually, the Kundalini is supposed to, in my understanding, take up the entire width of the backbone. Kundalini Rise happens when there's just enough of a break in each chakra to let through like just the tiniest sliver of Kundalini. So by the time you experience a full Kundalini Rise, it's really only risen about 1% or less of the width of your full spinal column. And in the end, your goal is to have it be 100% of the spinal column. And so Kundalini Rise is just the first step. And then you kind of have to keep doing more and more Kundalini Rises, as I feel like each percentage point wider that you get it, that's like you just release that same amount of trauma. So that can be, obviously difficult, but also just so rewarding. And I find that with every trauma that I release and heal from, I just feel that much stiller and that much more clear and that much more able to focus on the beautiful things in my life. Let me check on these questions here. Okay, I'll answer those questions in a little minute. Okay, so what does a Kundalini Rise feel like? A Kundalini Rise can come with a lot of symptoms, and a lot of you are already experiencing Kundalini Rise and you just didn't even know it. But some symptoms of Kundalini Rise are things like feeling weird. That was not a very good description, but tingling, buzzing, when you get like the shakes or, and they don't even make sense. You're like, why am I shaking? What? And feeling emotionally disrupted, feeling like very big mood swings is really a sign of Kundalini energy shaking up. Feeling like your emotions like are kind of out of control can be a sign of Kundalini Rise. And remember, it's your Kundalini triggering all of the things in your body that are not resolved, everything that needs to be resolved for it to continue its upward ascent. And that's why you're feeling these big emotions, is because these emotions are physically lodged in your body. Chemically, they are. We know that emotions are chemical because, that's how antidepressants work. they're actually blocking, these different chemicals of emotion. And these chemicals of emotion are also lodged in your spine. And so as this Kundalini is physically moving up your actual spine, it's dislodging these chemicals of that anxiety that you had. Is my lipstick the right color at homecoming, sophomore year, and so you sit there and you don't know that that's what was dislodged. All you know is like, I suddenly feel anxious. My heart is pounding. Like, is this, and so that's what's going on, is as this energy is moving up the spine, it's just dislodging all the stuff in the way. And that's why you experience these mood swings. And it can also, it's on your your nervous system, your spinal column, and it's the seat of so many nerves, and your nerves control, all of the sensations of your body. So it's very normal to experience like hot flashes, cold flashes, and also just a heightened ability to sense things. Like you could sense like your ancestors or your guardian angels or that sort of thing. That's very normal as your nervous system is upgrading. And that's basically what it is also, is the nervous system is upgrading. It's up-leveling, which this wasn't in my notes, but it's coming to me to share it. So Parley P. Pratt, the early apostle with Joseph Smith, he wrote a book called The Key to the Science of Theology, and it's free on Kindle, actually. So you can get it on Amazon and check it out. It's a really fascinating read. But he points out in that book that the way that we experience the Holy Ghost is through the nerves. And I feel like this makes a lot of sense. If you're feeling a burning in your bosom or something like that, like, what is that? Like, how do you feel anything? You feel it through your nervous system. And so having an upgraded nervous system, having a stronger nervous system and a more capable nervous system, really, like, the only outcome of that is, like, there's no other option but for you to be more able to feel spiritual things. And you become more and more able to sense spiritual things. So Kundalini, so you can also, having a Kundalini rise, you can also experience what feels like sensory overload, and all of a sudden, like, loud sounds are just too much, and craziness is just too much, and really a desire for things being stiller and calmer. And sometimes you might experience like these sudden flashes of insight into, like, those like enlightening moments where you're like, oh, like, now I understand how the world works, And so those are very normal symptoms, I guess you could say, of Kundalini rise. So as Kundalini is rising, it comes with its own challenges. And so self-care is just extra important. And that is things like grounding, centering, meditation, deep breathing. One good practice is to pray for help, experiencing, what is it? I prayed it, and I don't pray it usually because it is so overwhelming to suddenly breathe so much, but sometimes I pray to help me to breathe deeply enough to sustain normal health. And it makes a huge difference. Most people do not breathe deeply enough to sustain normal health, and it really shows in the quality of our health. Americans are not deep breathers, so it really pays off to just work hard to breathe deeply. Moderate and regular exercise, good sleep, a good diet, grounding food can be very helpful. The Kundalini rising process can be ungrounding, just because of its nature, passing through each chakra, dislodging trauma lodged in the spine. It can cause you to become ungrounded. So taking really good care of your diet can help a lot. As the Kundalini rises, sometimes people are drawn to things like sugar and caffeine and other stimulants. and which is very normal because they stimulate the nervous system, and that just feels like your body is just drawn to it, but that is not a good reason to partake of those things because they are actually counterproductive. So so if your Kundalini is rising, I understand, I really do, the draw of Twix bars and Reese's Pieces peanut butter cups, but it's really wiser if you can resist the temptation to stick with potatoes and beets and the stuff that you know you should eat, but maybe you don't really want to. So the Kundalini yogis are traditionally vegetarian. I personally am not, and I find meat to be very grounding, but everybody's body is different, and I really feel like it's important for you to get to know your own body and what is grounding and stabilizing for you personally, and also to recognize that that shifts depending on our life stages. You know, I'm still in my like nursing babies stage, and so a body that is nursing babies and dealing with pregnancies is going to need a lot more like animal products than a body that is not in that stage of life. So it really is it's something that will differ from person to person. So I mentioned this earlier, but just because the Kundalini rises, it doesn't mean that the journey stops there. So I don't know, it's an ongoing process, but people do feel very different after the Kundalini is fully risen, and even as it is rising. And as I sent out the emails building up to this webinar, a number of people wrote back and said, oh my gosh, I thought I was crazy, or I had no idea what was going on with me because I'm having all these symptoms and I just didn't know. Many people are experiencing these symptoms as all of the ingredients are coming together for Kundalini rise. And the earth itself is shifting in vibration and frequency. And as that happens, it's kind of shaking everything up also and creating an environment conducive for Kundalini rise. And that's one reason why people in all sorts of regions are experiencing these same kinds of symptoms, because it's an earth-wide, it's kind of an earth-wide event that's going on. So as I mentioned earlier, Kundalini rise used to take many, many years, and now it can be done in as little as an hour, depending on the person and everything. And that's just the plain old Kundalini rise, not even the widening of Kundalini. My Kundalini has been risen for several years now, and my Kundalini width is only about like 15%, which is, I think, huge, but also like compared to, like, if your goal is 100%, 15% is like not that much, you know what I mean? But the good news is that just as in the past, it used to take decades to raise the Kundalini, and now it can take an hour. Right now, expanding the Kundalini width has been kind of slow going, but as more and more people learn how to do it and begin to do it, and as it becomes more of an established morphic field, if you're familiar with that term, it will become easier and easier and easier for more people to experience that shift. So morphic fields are kind of like the energy surrounding an idea or an action. And basically the idea is that as more and more people engage in those activities, the energy field of that becomes stronger and stronger and stronger and more powerful, and it becomes easier to tap into. And there's another theory along with the concept of morphic fields, that once a particular tipping point is reached, say like 15% of the population, then all of a sudden everybody is reached. And it's kind of like, you know, nobody knows what penny loafers are. Nobody knows what penny loafers are. And then like suddenly they're everywhere. And it's because like one person knew, and then their best friend put them on too. And then like their friends did. And all of a sudden it was like the 15%. And then suddenly everybody saw them everywhere, you know, and Kundalini can be the same way. You know, as more and more people experience Kundalini rise, it becomes easier and easier for everybody. So we're still on kind of the cutting edge of Kundalini technology and So we are going to have it a little bit harder perhaps than other people, but kind of not really, because the sooner you can get yourself out of these root chakra patterns and into the more benevolent patterns of God-centered growth, I mean, that just makes life easier. Sorry, this is my son. His bedtime was probably like 2 hours ago, so my whole family really wants to be in on this lecture, I guess. What is the role of Kundalini yoga and meditation and Kundalini rise? I would say it's helpful, but not necessary. It's helpful, but not necessary. The necessary thing is removing the blocks in the spinal column. And that can be done through energy work as well. And I find that it can be done faster through energy work than through Kundalini yoga, if you have a practitioner that knows what they're doing. But Kundalini yoga is important because it stabilizes the flow of Kundalini, and it kind of retrains your body how to function with a strong flow of Kundalini. And it the nice thing about Kundalini yoga and meditation is that it naturally draws up the traumas that are lodged in the spine without you having to remember them. So what happens is, through your exercises, you're doing your spinal exercises in your Kundalini yoga, and it, just like how the Kundalini rising up the spine naturally dislodges parts, like different chemicals of emotion, so do these exercises of the spinal column. And so as these traumas are dislodged chemically, our bodies start to naturally process and metabolize them. And I mean metabolize in the literal way of, like, just like you metabolize food, these things are finally processed in a very literal way. And you can kind of transcend them without having to think about them, which is really nice. It's really normal for people who practice Kundalini yoga and meditation to suddenly realize that they suddenly just stopped chewing their nails, and they'd been a nail biter for 20 years, and all of a sudden it doesn't even occur to them. And it's because all of this, these different exercises have dislodged the traumas that were at the root of that. And now they get to experience the fruit of that, the benefit of having those traumas dealt with without having to go back and relive that terrible kindergarten moment where their teacher said X and it made them so anxious they started to chew their nails and they never got over it. So Kundalini yoga and meditation can be very helpful for doing that. And I think I do feel strongly that every person can really benefit from Kundalini exercise, and I do recommend that for everybody. And I teach Kundalini yoga, and I know many fantastic teachers that teach both online and in person. So if you're interested in a yoga class, please reach out, and I would love to hook you up with a local teacher or an online class that would be perfect for you. How does Kundalini fit in with the gospel? The premier text on this issue is written by Felice Austin, or Namjodi Kaur. Many of you might be familiar with her blog, Progressive Prophetess. But she wrote a book about this called Awake as in Ancient Days, the Christ-Centered Kundalini Yoga Experience. And it's really about yoga, Kundalini yoga, but it has a lot of good information on Kundalini and how it fits in with the gospel. But one good example that she has brought up before is Doctrine and Covenants 65. Now, this chapter only has 6 verses, so it's pretty easy to go through, but I still probably won't go through the whole thing, but you can. In the New Testament, Jesus teaches that the kingdom of God is within you, as in within your own body. And in the book of Romans, we are counseled to present our bodies as a pure and holy living sacrifice to the Lord. And so in D&C 65, it talks about how the voice goes to the end of the earth saying, "Prepare ye the ways of the Lord and make his paths straight." If the kingdom of God is within you, what is the path of the Lord? Well, the most obvious path is probably the spinal column, right? And so step one in a Kundalini rise is to make the Lord's paths straight and start developing that upright posture. So like verse 2 talks about the keys of the kingdom, and Felice likens it to what's called the locks of the body, and that's the different parts of the spine that you lock into this upright position to allow this energy to flow forward. And the chakras are also compared with locks or with seals. The word chakra means wheel, and the idea of chakras as like keys or as passages is it's a thing. So anyway, later on in this same chapter of D&C 65, it talks about how as you make the Lord's paths straight and call upon the Lord, that his kingdom may go forth upon the earth, the Son of Man shall come down in heaven to meet the kingdom of God, which is set up upon the earth. And, there's this implication that both parties are traveling. And if you look at it in this Kundalini light, it's like your own divine energy is rising up and God's divine energy is coming down to meet in this like holy union right there in your divine gift of your brain. And here's the last verse of that. Wherefore may the kingdom of God go forth, that the kingdom of heaven may come, that thou, O God, mayest be glorified in heaven, so on earth, that thine enemies may be subdued. For thine is the honor, power, and glory forever and ever. Amen. And so anyway, this chapter, this is just kind of another way to read that chapter that kind of illuminates the Kundalini experience, and how as we allow our own divine energy to rise within us and allow God's divine energy to rain down on us the way that we know that it does, it opens the way to glorify God in our own bodies and give him the honor and the power and the glory. And it also kind of radically changes our own mindsets and our own paradigms, as I was mentioning earlier, where we take that shift from wanting to watch TV to wanting to read our scriptures, and all of a sudden we are just so much more open to giving God the glory. And I just think that is such an amazing and beautiful thing. So here I have a couple of questions. Okay, I will just start at the bottom here. One question says, I've noticed that when some people have experienced a lot of trauma, sometimes they have a harder time feeling the spirit. Could those traumas be blocking the spirit? What I would say, again, pray about everything and come to your own conclusions. Don't just take my word for it ever. But what I would say is it's less that the traumas are blocking the spirit, but that the traumas are blocking the nervous system from functioning at optimal capacity. So if you feel the spirit through your nervous system, then your nervous system needs to be functioning properly for you to be able to decipher the things that the spirit is trying to tell you. And I do feel strongly that obviously God takes into account if your nervous system is functioning or not and how well it's functioning, and that he is very merciful, and it's not like anybody's going to be held accountable for misunderstanding a spiritual prompting or something because their physical body was not functioning appropriately or something like that. But what I find is that sometimes if you muscle test or something, you can test on if your nervous system is even on, like if it has an on or off switch, is it in the on position or is it in the off position? And many times people who have experienced extreme trauma will have their nervous systems in the off position, which makes a lot of sense. It's a self-defense mechanism to prevent themselves from having to fully experience their traumas with the full force of their functioning nervous system. So step 1 is to turn the nervous system back on, to clear the traumas that are blocking it from functioning appropriately. And then step 3 is to increase its capacity, because, you know, you can turn it back on and remove all the traumas, and now it's functioning at 100% of capacity. But what if its capacity is only like nothing, but what you really need is like a big capacity so that you can really feel the different things that people need to feel. So what you can do is come up with a scale and just see how functional their nervous systems are on the scale, and help them to I just go into there and I just command for it to upgrade as much as the body can physically support and is safe and in like God's divine will for that person, just so that the process is, you know, very safe and very appropriate for them. And for everybody it ends up differently, but it just kind of opens the way for them to be able to be physically capable of receiving more what you might call intuitive insight. Okay, Amber's session asked, is having your system upgrading, is that shifting into more of a terrestrial state? And I said, that's like that's a metaphor that I gave early on in the lecture. It's a metaphor, probably, or maybe not, I don't know, but pray about it. For me personally, I do feel like it is necessary. This is a necessary upgrade for becoming a Zion people. That's my own personal insight, which again, don't take my word for it. Go research and pray for yourself, but that is my personal feeling. How do we know where our Kundalini is? You can pray about it. You can muscle test on it. And if you are used to using your spiritual sight, your third eye, what you can do is just close your eyes and imagine your own Kundalini, and just pull up, just imagine, like if I had a symbol of my spinal column, where would my Kundalini be on there? And Kundalini is compared to fire. Some people call it like Kundalini fire. And so to me, it does actually look like kind of like a flame. And when people have fully risen Kundalinis, their spinal columns actually look like they're on fire, and they really radiate an enormous amount of light. And so you go into your mind and just ask yourself without judgment, like, what would it look like? What would my Kundalini look like? Where would it look on my spine? And just allow your imagination to generate that image for you. And it might just be like a little bit of light halfway up the spine. It might be a little spark at the bottom. It might be a whole bunch of nothing. And if it is a whole bunch of nothing, it may be an indicator that your chakras are missing, your Ida, Pingala, Sushmana are missing. You have not yet experienced a Kundalini spark. And those are things that, again, you can, you know, go to the Lord with in prayer. Those are things you can muscle test on. Those are things you can ask your own body, and just close your eyes and say, body, what is the reason why I'm not seeing anything? And just write it down and just trust it without judgment, and just be open to whatever insights come to you, and just trust that your internal wisdom is just really wise, and that it just is. And so even if it doesn't make sense, just write it down and say, this is going to make sense sometime, and trust that over time it will just make sense. I was asked, do you have time to talk about how to get chakras back in place and the other energy paths? How can we help them get and stay in place? So chakra manipulation is actually easy. If you go into it with the belief that it's easy. So the real, I use a theta state, but really I believe that as the earth is shifting in vibration, it's becoming easier and easier to access the state without even knowing what you're doing, which is exciting. What I would say is imagine, just go into your powerful mind and use your powerful imagination to imagine your chakras wherever they are, and just picture them in your mind, and then ask for them to come back, and just witness. Use your power as a witness. Utilize the what is it called? The observer effect, which I kind of feel like may be analogous to the law of witnesses, to witness your chakras coming back into a perfect alignment. Notice if they're spinning or if they kind of give you the idea of spinning, and if they're not, see if you can get them to start gently rotating. And what helps me is to imagine them getting themselves spinning again, and I just say the numbers out loud, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and make sure that they're spinning. And just saying it out loud for me just is kind of like an anchor for each one to just start spinning. Let's see. I'm not sure if I even talked about that, but I do think Kundalini, your chakras have to be there and they have to be functioning appropriately. So they do need to be spinning. And they do need to be sufficiently trauma-free, which is what the next step is removing the traumas from these chakras and allowing the rise of Kundalini upward. The other energy paths, same thing. Use your powerful imagination. Imagine them wherever they're at and just call them back, and then imagine them being reinstalled. If they look sparkly or like they have flecks, it can look sparkly, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. It can really be flecks. One thing that comes to mind is in First Nephi, where Lehi has a dream, and then Nephi has the same dream. And Nephi notices a whole lot of stuff that Lehi didn't notice. And the reason why was not that those details were not there when Lehi looked, but Lehi just didn't look close enough. And so it's possible to see things and just not look close enough. So just always try and look close enough. Sometimes those flecks can be indicative of fracturing. And so it is really not unusual for an Ida Pingala Sushmana that has fled to be fractured, and that is a response to whatever trauma caused it to flee. It broke and ran away at the same time. Or sometimes it broke first and then ran away, like that kind of thing. But so what you want to do is heal it up first. So what I always do is imagine those pieces, any missing pieces, I imagine them being dipped in healing water and leaving their trauma behind, and they come out sparkly and clean. I heal them up in my mind just with my powerful imagination, heal them up so that there's no fractures. And then I always ask, like, is it ready to come back? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I ask for God's divine perspective on the situation that caused the trauma, or on the trauma that caused it to flee, to be installed into the anatomy that's missing so that it has that divine perspective. And I ask for it to be downloaded with the life lessons of the person that it belongs to up until this point in their lives. So you're not like, sometimes if you reinstall a chakra that's been gone since they were 2, like you reinstall it and all of a sudden they're having all of these like mind issues, like all of the 2-year-old issues that the chakra never really like processed, you know. That's not very pleasant. So you just kind of gotta throw it up, make sure it knows where things are at. Oh, somebody's not muted. Oh, thank you. And so you grow it up to the present. Can you please mute yourself, whoever you are that is not muted? Anyway, so who is this? I'm going to speak off if you are not muted.
How many times did you meet either at the White House or the White House?
It's not muted.
Officials come about, yes. I think that we have shown my calendar.
Anyway, so you grow it back up, download all of its life lessons, and then you just reinstall it, and then you can ask for all of the tissues around it to learn how to interact with it again and make sure that the body knows what to do with it. Sometimes bodies forget, so you got to remind it. How can we help them to get and stay in place? The trick to keeping your chakras and everything else in place, well, first off, once your Kundalini is fully risen, I feel like they are no longer able to flee, which has pros and cons. The ability of chakras and stuff to flee is a protective mechanism, and it is very effective. It protects you from these very dark emotions and dark traumas and stuff like that. So if your Kundalini is risen just a little bit, or like it's risen all the way but only at 1%, and then you experience these major traumas, like your body all of a sudden is kind of more limited in its responses, as far as like it can't just explode itself and hope for the best. It's like it's stuck in your body, which is good. But that's where Kundalini yoga and meditation comes in, and ongoing self-care and energy work to clear up new traumas as they arise. But remember that the end goal is to become a Zayan person, regardless of Kundalini. And becoming a Zayan person, part of being a Zayan person is being a person that is not traumatized by the traumas of life, transcending the traumas of life, and becoming the kind of person that can experience an extreme trauma without even feeling that response of like, I'm going to tear my hair out, or, just the, becoming a Zayan person is removing all the from our system. And Kundalini yoga and meditation naturally tone the nervous system and prepare you to be the kind of person that when these big traumas come up in your life, that they don't traumatize you. So that's really the end goal here, is to become a person that does not experience trauma, not because traumatic things don't happen, but because you, as a spirit body united entity, have transcended the natural man nervous system response of fight or flight or freeze, and you have moved into this ability to love and come at every situation from a place of wisdom and charity, no matter how traumatic it would be to anybody. I hope that answered that question. Here are more questions. Can this heal food allergies and physical pain? How do you clear traumas? Do you have to go to someone, or can you work on it alone? I haven't tried to use Kundalini stuff with food allergies, so I don't know. I don't see why not. I feel like all trauma needs to be cleared eventually, and all physical issues are also energetic. And so as you clear the things that are contributing to food allergy, I feel like they would spontaneously clear up. My kids are all food allergic, and we're still navigating this at home. And I know I have my own blocks on food allergy, but I am keenly interested in figuring it all out. Clearing traumas, you can definitely do it alone. If you, hopefully you've all have been to my blog before, but it's just allieduzett.blogspot.com. But just last week or 2 weeks ago or something, I posted a self-healing exercise that can be really effective in clearing trauma. And what you can do is just go into your powerful mind and just ask yourself, like, if there was a situation that needed healing so that my Kundalini could rise, what would it be? And, have your pen and paper there, be in a kind of a quiet state where you can really focus on the things that come up and just write down everything that comes. And the important thing is to emote and to just feel the feelings that come up, even if you don't understand the situation that's coming up, to just really feel it and just get it all out. All of these emotions really just want to be validated and honored. And so in my own energy work, I really feel like my job is to just honor everything and just accept it and just say, like, that's really understandable. I understand why you would feel that way, and I honor that. And just coming at every trauma in your own life and in your family's lives and in everybody's life with that kind of attitude is just very healing. And as these emotions are validated and as these traumas are validated, they will just start going. They'll just start shifting on out of your life. So if you experience an emotional trauma but it doesn't really affect you, what does that mean? Or more so, you're okay with it. I say that good for you, but also make sure that it really didn't affect you, because sometimes our bodies can just, they'll just be like, that was really traumatic, so I'll just stick it over here. Like, I'll just lock it in a box and just like stick it in the back of my hip or something like that, and I just won't think about it. So I don't know. I feel like for my own self, like my my own life, all the traumas in my life, I was just very, very adept at just boxing them up and just that very Scarlett O'Hara, Gone with the Wind, like, well, I'll just think about that tomorrow. And so I just had this whole backlog of just junk that I wasn't dealing with, and that's kind of what propelled me into this energy healing journey, was having to unbox all of those boxed up things. But the thing is that even once you have reached, like, even once you've had a Kundalini rise, your subconscious mind is still very adept at protecting you, and it can still certainly box up difficult emotions that you don't want to face and just stick them somewhere in your energy field, hoping that you won't notice because it doesn't want to ruffle your feathers and make your life more difficult now. It's like, it'll be easier to deal with later. But as we all know, sometimes sweeping things under the rug is not the way to clean the floor. How do you know if it's in a box or off to the side? Again, you can pray about it. You can muscle test it. You can just close your eyes and ask your infinitely wise intuition, like, if I were hiding something, if I did not want to see a trauma, if I were hiding a trauma, what would it look like? Where would it be? And if you're concerned about a block that's keeping you from seeing these things, you can just say, hello, block, are you there? And just invite it to come and talk to you. And I know it just sounds so ridiculous, but you can have a total conversation with this thing in your mind. And you just have to, the point of that exercise is to validate the block and just say, like, I honor that. I honor whatever you have to say. And thank you. And just saying, thank you for being there. Thank you for the purpose that you've served in my life. Thank you. And it's important to remember that all of these protection mechanisms, they can lead to, uncomfortable and miserable situations in our lives. But in the end, it's really our body and our psyches working together to protect us. And even when it results in things that we really don't like obesity or like unemployment or just all these different situations that we find ourselves in that are not pleasant, it's always for our highest good. It's always because our psyches and our bodies are working together to try and give us exactly the experiences that we need and that are going to keep us safe. And so for me, I just am always just so grateful to our bodies for the hard work that they do in protecting us, even when they do it in ways that we don't really like. It's always done with the best of intention, Oh, I love this. Krista writes, the trauma conveyor belt to cold storage. That is just like so true. And I think so many of us have that just built in, like, oh, another trauma. Okay, goodbye. Like, we'll just stick that off in the corner, don't want to look at it. Don't want to see it. Okay, well, our hour is up. And I think I need to really attend to some baby bedtimes here. But please write to me, send me any other questions or thoughts that you have. I want to hear them. And this was really fun. We'll do it again. And I am planning to send out some more information about Kundalini very soon. So be on the lookout for that. I hope you just have a wonderful, wonderful night, everybody. Good night.